r/AskReddit. Parents of Reddit, how did your son/daughters so win you over? My wife's dad has a very nice wakeboarding boat he loves more than anything. I went out on the boat with him and other family, including my wife, for a day of hanging out on the lake. Several hours later, and several beers later, we drove the boat back to the marina. Once there he realizes he's the only one who can back the truck/trailer down the boat ramp and then dock the boat on the trailer properly. However, it's a holiday weekend and there's a large line of boaters waiting to load, so he wouldn't have time to back down the trailer then get back on the boat to pilot it onto the trailer without people going apeshit mad. Realizing his predicament, I mention I've been driving boats since I was 5 years old, so he reluctantly disembarked from the boat onto the shore to get the truck, while I was left as acting captain of the SS. If you scratch this boat I will end you. I docked the boat on that trailer on the first try quickly and perfectly straight and balanced. That's easy for a little John boat outboard, but a very large 28-foot wakeboarding boat, it can be difficult for even seasoned pros. After that he said I could take the boat out whenever I wanted to, even without him. Translation: I love you more than my own flesh and blood. My daughter's so gonna call him John gained my full approval just recently. A little backstory: me and my wife had an accidental baby just last year. We are in our late 40s. And my family was rather shocked considering we already have a 28-year-old son and a 22-year-old daughter at that point. This may sound strange so far, but it will make sense later. My daughter met John in college and started dating after being friends for a year or so. Didn't take long after that before we met him, and we thought he was a decent kid, if not a little bit socially awkward and sort of uncomfortable around us. All of her previous boyfriends were more outgoing, and this kid was quiet. Didn't really think he was going to last. My daughter eventually got an internship out of country and now they're LTR. And I was skeptical whether or not this kid was going to stick around. Strangely enough, he visits the house and hangs out with my older son and we all talk and have dinner together pretty frequently, which is interesting considering my daughter never expected him to do this. I found out that the main reason that he visited us so often was because my daughter was worried that her new little brother would forget who she is while she was gone. So when John would play with our son, when he thought nobody was around, he would show him pictures of my daughter making goofy faces to try to make sure that he will remember his big sister. When I brought it up with my daughter, she didn't know that John was doing this. That was probably the moment where I started wholeheartedly approving of him. Not a parent but a brother. My parents are divorced and remarried. Generally don't really get along with their respective ex. My sister and her fiance had a housewarming party not too long ago and invited both sets of parents, along with other family and friends. My soon-to-be brother-in-law and I have always gotten along great. Who doesn't love drinking and fishing? So we spent the night just drinking and enjoying ourselves. At one point though, he and my stepmom are talking, and he calls over my mom into the conversation. I'm standing with my sister and we are both dumbfounded. Our parents have been divorced for like 15 years, have never spoke to one another, and this guy just pulled two of them together for like a 20 to 30 minute conversation. It absolutely blew my mind. The next morning, while my sister made pancakes and we nursed our hangovers, he told me the entire reason for the housewarming party was to see how my parents would react around one another, and if needed, it wasn't. Telling my parents that they're eventually going to have grandkids before long, and if they want to be a part of their lives they have to act like adults and be okay with seeing their ex every once in a while. The fact he was willing to do that for my sister completely set my mind at ease. I definitely liked him before, but that was the moment I knew he was perfect for my sister. I'll tell you the story of how my husband won over my dad. My dad has a sailboat, which he is kind of crazy about. My husband has a background in naval architecture. We went to visit my dad, and while we were on his boat in the marina, the guy in the slip next to us runs over. My boat is taking on water. He says, "Come help me bail it out." "Don't worry," responds my father. My son-in-law is a naval architect, Something to note at this point in the story, my now husband and I had only been dating for like 8 months. We weren't even close to getting engaged, let alone married. But now all of a sudden boyfriend is his son-in-law. So now husband just goes with it. Sure. I, the son-in-law, will see if I can help. He gets on the guy's boat and sees that there's water seeping through the floorboards. He thinks this is weird, given that the pump is going and the boat isn't listing or anything. So he gets down, sticks his finger in the water, and licks it. It's fresh water. Now husband says, "Your bilge is leaking. Did you remember to turn off the hose after you finished filling up your fresh water tank?" And that, my friends, is how my husband became a legend in Ads Marina and my dad's favorite person of all time. Edit, because, despite being with my husband for almost 10 years now, I still know shit about naval architecture and gold. I'm so glad you guys got a kick out this story. All these years later, it certainly still cracks me up. Anyway, many thanks. I know the exact moment I won my wife's family over. I could see it in her father's eyes. It was high school, before we started dating. The first time I went over to her house. Actually, her father and 2 brothers are all pretty tall, and I'm average height. It's a very alpha male household, and they had this thing they like to do to potential boyfriends. So when my wife left the room to go to the bathroom or whatever, all 3 of them stood, lined up shoulder to shoulder, and loomed over me. Blank-faced, glaring down, no words, no motion, just staring and looming. I found out later that her last boyfriend almost cried when they did this to him. I've always been really socially awkward, but an odd part of that awkwardness is that I'm never intimidated by people. I don't know why, but they just don't frighten me. I slowly stood up, looking them all in the eye, and then poked her dad right in the tummy. I said, "Boop." He stared for a second, and then a giant grin split his face. It turns out that he's a massive goofball. From that moment on, I was a member of the family. The whole dating and marriage thing was just a formality to them. Edit, AWW. Thanks for the gold, guys. I'm glad my near murder could bring you some laughs. Our daughter came home from college with a boy she had been dating for a few weeks. They weren't serious, but he lived too far away to go home for Thanksgiving. That weekend, her old high school flame dropped by. We didn't like him much. He had been very abusive when our daughter was dating him. When he showed up, he tried to convince our daughter to go someplace with him to talk things over. She didn't want to, and so he started getting loud and obnoxious. The new boyfriend was trying to give her some space and not be the possessive caveman type, but when he heard the old boyfriend call our daughter the C word, he came out on the porch and threw a wicked punch at the guy. Unfortunately, he missed, and he got the worst of the ensuing scuffle before I could break it up. But he got a few good licks in, and I'm pretty sure some of them would leave nice bruises. Not that I condone brawling, mind you. Old boyfriend skulked off, and we brought the new boyfriend in and got him cleaned up. He was only 19, but he got an ice cold beer with dinner. They dated a couple of years, but eventually broke up. She's had a few boyfriends since, but he's the only one I ever addressed as son. Not a parent, but I'll talk about how my white as Wonder Bread so found some common ground with my Middle Eastern parents. Eating meals together is a really important part of my culture. My current so was willing to try anything and everything my mom put in front of him. My so came from a household where his mother only ever cooked meat and potato types of meals and they never ate out at restaurants, so he had a beginner's palate. Still, he tried everything from picked vegetables to rice with weird stuff in it, and even stews that looked like liquid poop. Fessengen, anyone. My mom is a sucker for anyone who will eat her food, so she started to like him a bit more after having him over for dinner. Edit, RIP my inbox. I will try to reply to as many of you as I can. Thank you for sharing your stories and love of Persian food. TLDR, angsty teenage asshole son meets wonderful girl who turns him into a human being, making us fall in love with her. My son was suffering from an acute case of testosterone poisoning, aka being a typical teenage boy. He hated us. He hated his siblings. He hated school. He hated life. He didn't believe in the concept of having a future. About the only thing keeping him breathing was his guitar. Then along came Jessie, not her real name. Absolutely gorgeous girl, talented. They met because he needed someone to sing the songs he was writing. Smart as heck. She got into college a year early and just a joy to have around. To be honest, my wife and I fell in love with her long before our son did. He had to be smacked in the head a bit to even realize he was smitten. When he fell hard. And luckily, it was the same for her. Now like I said, Jessie is a wonderful girl, so we would have loved her for her own merits regardless. But it's the effect that she's had on our son that made us fall in love with her. At first after they started dating, my son was still a typical asshole teenager. But Jessie must have seen something in him that we never could. He was still an ass around his family, but the first time she was around to see it, she called him on it. When he did poorly in school, she asked him how he expected to get into college and support a family, implying with her, I suspect. So he started getting better grades. When he got frustrated with all of the social crap that goes down in high school, she got him to realize it was basically bullshit that wasn't worth it. And so on, and so on. Little by little, she turned him into a human being. The culmination of all this came one day when Jessie was over at our house for a family dinner. He stood up and said that he realized he had been a real tool for a long time and that he was sorry and that he knew he had to be a better person. Then he thanked Jessie for giving him a reason to be a better person and for being someone worth being better for. Hugs and tears all around. And then he made good on his promise. Today, he's a son and a friend who I can be proud of. Frankly, if Jessie had never come into the picture, I doubt he'd be alive. They're still together junior year of college, and they got engaged a few weeks ago. At their wedding I plan to say this, the old cliche about not losing a son, but gaining a daughter doesn't apply, because Jessie brought back to us the son we thought we had lost, and we can't gain a daughter, because she has been that, and more to us for close to 7 years. My grandmother has never liked any of my boyfriends. She always told me flat out that she didn't really like them, which hurt me immensely, but wasn't really out of character. Pretty much nothing I pursued or achieved was good enough for her. I resigned myself to the fact that she would never like anyone I brought home. She never really warmed up to my mother. Even though my mom is an amazing human being, no one was good enough for my dad in her mind. Then one day she surprised me. After meeting my so for the first time she told me, well, I didn't expect to like him, but I did. He looks at you when you speak, listens to what you say, and responds in a way that shows genuine interest. That was it. That's all a guy had to do in order to impress my grandmother. I'm slightly horrified that she didn't see those qualities in any of the other men I brought home. That happened 6 years ago, and my so and I are married now, expecting our first child. When my then boyfriend now husband dropped everything and took a long weekend off work to make a 5-hour drive with me to go say goodbye to my dying great-grandmother. We had about 3 hours notice before leaving and drove down during a snowstorm. I had called him from work, a sniveling snotty sobbing mess, and his first questions were, where do we need to be, when can you get home from work, I'll meet you there and we can leave, and can you book the hotel room when you're on your way home. I work with my dad in a small office, and he saw all of this unfold. On our way back home a couple days later, we took a detour to take one of my great aunts to the airport. Road conditions were shitty and my great aunt is notorious for being jumpy, but he was calm and collected and his normal sweet self, and she raved about him afterwards. I think that was the point where they realized, although I'd known it for 2 years at least, that he really is a fantastic guy who was raised to know how important family can be. And all of my great aunts absolutely love him now too. My now husband, David, and I met online and were in a RLDR while I was in college near Gillithemen. We had never met in person before, and I invited him to come see me. I told my mom about the meeting, and she was really paranoid, call me every day, so I know you're alive type of thing. He came and we really hit it off, and were having a lot of fun. After day 2 mom was convinced that he at least wasn't an axe murderer. And after a couple of more days I decided that I was into him enough that he should meet my parents. I know, poor guy, but this was a good thing in the long run, so I invited them up on that Saturday. They picked us up, and we all went out to lunch, and made some polite conversation, and we decided we should take a small trip to Split Rock Lighthouse, a famous lighthouse on Lake Superior about an hour from Duluth. I remembered that I left my camera in my dorm, so we swung by so I could pick it up. I left David in the car with my folks, alone for just a few minutes. While I was gone my dad joked, quick, let's drive off. To which David, who has a very sarcastic dry wit, responded, I knew that one way or another this trip would end with me dead in the woods. There was a shocked pause, and then my parents started cracking up. When I returned it was clear the ice had broken, and they relayed what had been said to me. My mom was like, I think he'll fit right in. She often relayed this story, characterizing it as the moment she decided that David was right for me. Luckily I agree, haha. I'm a white American man married to a Japanese woman. Here's the story of how I won over her dad, then got him to hate me, then won him back. While we were dating, I was living and working in Japan, and I won over her dad because I could tell puns in Japanese, his favorite style of humor, and because we shared common interests in films and music. We also just got along well, in general. However, he was very old-fashioned, and so my then girlfriend opted to not ever tell him that we were officially dating, even though it was obvious. My company ended up transferring me to Canada, so my girlfriend and I decided to get married in a hurry so she could go with me. When we announced this to her dad, his eyes instantly turned red as he realized his daughter was leaving the house and the country. Tearfully he asked me what my plans were for my career, how I would take care of her, etc. Somehow none of my answers seemed to please him, and the night ended with me feeling like I had fucked up pretty bad. He didn't speak to me for more than 3 weeks, and I knew he resented me for taking his daughter. Then my parents and 3 of my siblings came to Japan to be there when we signed the legal marriage documents, even though we were planning to have a real wedding 1 year later. Both families got together for a fancy and my family saved my ass. They brought gifts for my future in-laws, told stories, jokes, and treated them like royalty. My future in-laws loved my family, and by the end of the week, I was newly married, and my new wife's father treated me like a son of his own. We have gotten along famously ever since, and I credit that all to my amazing parents, brothers, and sisters. Funny end note, we had a real wedding 1 year later, at my home in Chicago. My wife's father's speech ended up being the highlight of night. It went something like this, paraphrasing. 150 years ago, Admiral Perry of the US Navy came to Japan, pointed his ship's cannons at Tokyo, and demanded that Japan open itself to the West for trade. In much the same way, James came into our lives and pointed his cannons at my family. But just as the US and Japan came to be close allies and friends, so too has James grown to be a close friend and member of our family. Everyone told me it was the best part of the wedding. This is a story from my so's parents. It was first year of university and it's still summery outside. Every night for the first week here was drinking and partying on the quad and in the dorms. Well, at the time I had met my so once in the hallway and that was it. Well, one night she goes out and gets blasted, cause her previous BF was always partying despite her protests. Well, she nearly died of alcohol poisoning that night. She was rushed off to the hospital for detox and such. I had no idea this had happened. I only saw the ambulance pull up to my dorm building. The next morning around 5 AM she was knocking on my door still inebriated from the night before. I didn't understand anything she was saying because she just kept saying she woke up in a room, locked to a bed, with needles in her arm, in a thick Slovakian accent too. She failed to mention she was at the hospital, so I let her in my dorm. sat her on my bed, made her a cup of Earl Grey, and put Tarzan on my telly, and had her watch it. Then I slowly tracked down her phone, wallet, and keys she had lost all over campus the night before. Then I bought her a giant 2L bottle of water and food. I brought her to her room, and gave her the food, and then some Advil. She told her parents all this, and they were very happy someone had helped her. Later that week she started inviting me everywhere, and we eventually became best friends, and then even more than that. Well, Christmas break rolls around, and she left before me to go skiing with her family. I was texting her asking where she and her family were skiing. They were at a mountain not far away. I asked her how happy she would be if I came the next day. She was thrilled, but thought I was blowing hot air. To her surprise, I was at a lodge the next day after a 12-hour bus ride. She couldn't believe it, and her parents were impressed that I went through all that trouble. I spent the next 3 days skiing and going to hot springs, and then I bussed back to the university to finish my last final. 3 years later I'm still with her, and her parents still highly approve of me for all the things I do for her. Sorry for the wall of text, but it's a big story. Not a parent, but how I won my in-laws over was pretty harrowing/funny. My wife and I knew each other for years, but having done the long distance thing, I didn't meet her family until we eloped. I met the in-laws a day before the wedding. Due to the madness though, I didn't get to know them until a short while later. Visiting them for the weekend, my wife's mom said I could help myself to anything in the fridge. Me, my wife and her brothers went out drinking, and when I came back they urged me to take liberties with any leftovers, which I of course had no problem with. Stumbling upon a bag full of bacon, the shit was equivocal to manna from heaven. Unbeknownst to me though, mom-in-law had cooked it in preparation for one of her kids' graduation parties the next day. I had the misfortune of seeing her wake up, walk to the fridge, discover that I had eaten all of her bacon, and start bawling. She was so stressed about the party that this was the straw that broke the mother-in-law's back. It was my first real impression on her, and I done fucked up. The rest of the fam was really cool about it, and assured me she would get over it. I felt terrible about it though. The next time I visited them, I didn't say anything about it. Still too fresh. But I wore a shirt I made that had big bold letters saying sorry I ate your bacon. We've bonded over the trauma ever since. I don't know about when it happened for sure, but the moment I honestly felt accepted by my SOS family was when we had just gotten back from our very first road trip together. We drove to Miami from Houston and stayed at SeaWorld Hotel next to Universal Studios. Anyways, I was having a beer and shooting pool with her dad and grandpa when suddenly her dad looks at me and says, "You know you're the first boyfriend to make it through a vacation with my daughter and still be in love with her when you get back." I wasn't surprised after the trip I'd just had, but he was right. I still loved her, and that had only grown through the past vacation. He asked what the worst part was, and I told him it was when my GF, his daughter, had wanted to do something, and I told her no, because it wasn't a good idea. The look of utter shock on his face was unexpected. Then her grandpa chimed in, "Same look of shock, you told her no?" Then her dad goes, "And lived?" Then they started laughing, and instead of asking me to get the beer, her dad handed me one. I felt respected, a bit, and at the least, accepted as a man within her family. Edit. Clarification on GF's behavior. The reason for shock was that she had never had a boyfriend that stood up to her. They were glad I wasn't a pushover. That's all. Her mother also commented to her, "She told me about it after the fact, that I have the patience of a saint." Her actions on the trip. First off, let me explain a bit. My SO is a very high-strung individual who has had traumatic events take place in her past. No, I won't go into any more detail. She has a script now for high anxiety, legitimately attained after blood work, and has regular meetings with her physician. So imagine being with a still relatively new boyfriend. We'd only known each other about 6 months, away from home, and on a very busy freeway that passes through small towns in backwoods Alabama and Florida. Very stressful for anyone. But throw in the fact that she wasn't yet on medication for her imbalance, she was having a rough time of things. Metaphorical example of the problems we fought about until we both broke down and had a heart-to-heart at the end of the week, which is where we calmly sat and discussed what was really bothering us. We are standing in a field of yellow daisies. Sunny out, good mild weather. When she would decide the daisies should have been tulips, and then it's my fault we didn't find the right field. Again, metaphor showing how pointless the fight was, and I did not help the situation at all. When dealing with things that bother me, especially if it's someone I care for, I will put up a wall of arsehole. Seriously, I get mean when I'm frustrated. She's anxious over nothing, and thus adds to the storm. Not pretty. We are now settled in quite well, and have been together for 3 years, living in the same apartment for 1.5 years. Yes, sometimes we fight over silly things, but in the end we always find a solution to the problem, and then put it into action. She's learned that, when I do voice a no, it's because of a good reason, and no longer questions it. In turn, I show respect, and do the same. If it confuses one of us, we ask later, when we are at home and calm. I love this woman, and I'm secretly working on a way to propose to her. That is all. Probably too late to join, but this is a great story. We hated our daughter so, before we even met him. She's a high-achieving, beautiful girl, smartest of all my kids, apple of her dad's eye. She began dating a guy 8 years older, no education after high school, still living at home with his parents. He was covered in tattoos, was a long-time smoker, no career plans in sight. My daughter was 19 at the time and well headed to med school. After meeting him, she told us she was dropping out of college. Talk about parents' worst nightmare. Our only daughter. Turns out she had been seriously stressed for a number of years, trying to keep up with family and parental expectations, working toward a career she had no interest in, and was suffering from severe depression. This guy listened and supported her. And when she decided to end it all, he was the one who found her and saved her life. Spend a few days in the ICU with your kid struggling for her life, with her so constantly beside her talking, caring, touching her even though through her coma she probably couldn't hear him. Watch him support her through the horrible days that followed, with the memory loss and severe mood swings and continued depression. See your daughter grow stronger through the steady support of someone who believes totally in her value and loves her for who she is, not who he wants her to be. After those weeks, even months, you will see that tattoos don't matter, education doesn't matter, life circumstances don't matter. What matters is that someone knows and loves your child. Her so is still a part of our family, even though they are no longer together. He turned out to be a wonderful person with many qualities that are rare in today's world. I learned an important lesson about judgment through our relationship with him. Thank you so much for watching the whole video. Please leave a like and subscribe.